got it started. Awesome. All righty, I'm Paige and I'm an alcoholic. And so where we are going to pick up it is on page 5 in Bill's story. And I know that most of you guys were here with me next week or last week, and hopefully next week too. But where we left off was we're really starting to see the consequences of Bill's alcoholism, and very much we're starting to see the consequences of his physical allergy. So he's starting to lose jobs and positions and esteem, and he's starting to have those external physical consequences as a result of his inability to control the amount that he takes. And starting right at the top of page 5, he says, welcome, we're on page 5. I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places. And one of the things as we go through this book, I always want to see where I look or see where I relate and see what my experience is. And that was always a line that got me. I don't know what it's like to be an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places, but I know what it's like to feel like an unwelcome hanger-on in my life, in my family, with my friends, that feeling that I'm apart from and that I don't fit in. He goes on to say, liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. So what's happening for Bill is alcohol is no longer this thing that is like wonderful and it's enjoying life. He needs it to function. Now, as we read through this paragraph, let's look at it as if we were sponsoring Bill. If Bill was a newcomer and he was telling us about his alcoholism, he's just telling us about his drinking, and we'll listen intently, and we're going to see if we can pick up what Bill picks up, or if we see the situation a little bit differently. So he says, bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine. The bathtub gin would be home brewed alcohol. We are in the era, in and around the era of prohibition, so where alcohol was illegal in the United States. And he says, sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s. Now, last week we were talking about how he was living with the in-laws and how there were $60,000 in debt, and so he gets a few $100s, and he would pay his bills at the bars and delicatessens. So where he is spending his money is where he can continue to drink, paying down those debts. And he said, this went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. So we're beginning to see some of the physical consequences, some of the physical side effects of alcoholism. A tumbler full of gin followed by half a dozen bottles of beer, that's 6. So a tumbler of gin and 6 beers would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. So us, as the sort of hypothetical sponsors in the situation, anyone else alarmed? Anyone else like, Bill, this is not good. You're in trouble. You're needing to drink a tumbler of gin and 6 beers before you can even have anything to eat in the morning. And that's my response to it. I'm like, Bill. And of course, maybe I do qualify for Al-Anon a little bit, but I'm like, Bill, this is not good. And this is Bill's response. Bill says, nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. Is that not my experience? That people would, on the outside, look at it and be like, Paige, this is not good. I'm like, no. I got it. I can control this situation. And it says, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. So he's not a daily drinker. He's not drinking every single day. There are periods of sobriety, but we can see quite clearly that things are not going well, and he's in trouble. It says gradually things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. And things weren't good to start this paragraph, and it gets worse. And one of the things I just kind of want to share, because I think it's always important, at least for me, to speak to some of the feelings and the emotions that I imagine Bill would be going through. When it talks about how his wife became ill, and I don't know if this is the exact point in the story, but this is the point in the story where I talk about it. Bill and Lois desperately wanted to have children. They wanted to be parents. They wanted to have kids. And unfortunately, Lois had a number of miscarriages. And there were times where Lois would be in the hospital and Bill wouldn't be able to be there to support her. And again, I don't know what it's like to be the husband of a wife going through that, but I know what it's like not to be able to show up for my loved ones in the way that I wanted to. I know what it's like to let people down one more time, again and again and again. And then they decided, like maybe the best thing for us to do is to adopt. So they began to look at adoption as an option for them. And one of Lois's friends actually reached out to the adoption agency and said, please don't give them a child. Bill's an alcoholic, and it's not going to go well. Like, please don't do that. And again, like, man, I know what it's like to be the one that really hurt people like Bill, and to keep people from things that they wanted. I know it's tough, right? And then he says, then I got a promising business opportunity. There's that glimmer of hope, right? There's that glimmer of hope. Listen, I can turn this thing around. And I use that because so many times in my drinking, I was going to turn it around and I was going to get it together. He's got a glimmer of hope. Stocks were at a low point in 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. We're going to be rich. It's going to be okay. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. Prodigious would be the bender to end all benders, like the bender of benders. Like he went on just a bad tear. Again, to kind of color in some of the story and kind of color in what happened here. So Bill Wilson, he's going to this, they're doing this like deal, and he's showing up, and he knows. He's like, I'm not going to drink. And so they're going around, and out somebody pulls out a bottle of Applejack, and it's this type of alcohol. And it goes around the room, and the first time it goes around the room, he's like, no, thank you. I'm not going to drink them. Let's get this deal done. We're going to do this. Absolutely. I don't need to drink. No, thank you. And it goes around a second time, and he's like, no, I don't need to drink. No, thank you. We're going to get right down to business. We're going to get this thing done. I'm here for business. And the third time it goes around the room, he gets that thought. Well, I've never had Applejack. How many of us have had that thought, right? Well, but when I got sober, White Claw wasn't a thing, not that I was drinking that sort of like, that's a little bit classy for me. But that there's always that alcohol that comes around, and and that is an insane thought. And as a result, he goes on this bender, destroys that financial opportunity. I woke up. This had to be stopped. So what we're seeing, one of the things we want to do is we go through Bill's stories. We want to see his examples of the cycle. So right now he's waking up and he knows he blew that business deal. He's full of that remorse, regret. And in this paragraph, we're going to see him use his very first formal swearing off, saying, that's it. I'm never going to drink again. So I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw that I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. So he means it. And that's the thing. I don't know about you, but for me, there were those times where I meant it with everything in me when I said I would never drink again. I didn't want to do it again. He means it. And when he talks about having written lots of sweet promises in the past, they saved his like sort of family Bible. And there were times there were a number of times where he would write on the family Bible, I, William Wilson, like I will never drink again. And that was a sign of a solemn oath, a promise that we mean. And the power of alcoholism is that no matter how much I want to, no matter how much I need to, that I am never going to drink again has no effect. And so he said, that's it. I'm never going to drink again. And with everything in him, he means it. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. And what we can write there in our margins, if we're writing in our book, right? We can in the previous paragraph we can write swearing off, and in this paragraph we can write the mental obsession. because he had an insane thought. And he had no effective mental defense against that insane thought, right? It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. He just not long ago destroyed this business opportunity as the result of a prodigious bender. He swore off, he said, that's it, I'm never going to drink again. And it had absolutely no effect, no ability to keep him sober. Somebody pushed a drink his way without even thinking about the consequences, without the capacity to play the tape to the end, without any sort of thought, he takes it. And that is the mental obsession. We're just at the very, very bottom of page 5, where it says, renewing my resolve, I tried again. So that's him swearing off again. That's it. I'm never going to drink again. I'm done. I don't know. That was an anomaly. I'm never going to do it again. Some time passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. Got a lot of confidence, got a little cocky. He's got this thing, right? I could laugh at the gin mills. Top of page 6. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. I got this thing. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. So in between, one day I walked into a cafe to telephone, and in no time I was beating on the bar. You can make a little note, the mental obsession. So what happens is he goes to a cafe, again, to use the telephone. And I just kind of want to point out that that's not a crazy decision for him to go to the cafe to use a telephone. We're talking the 1930s. Not every household had a phone. They had the party lines. That's a normal thing. But when he enters, at some point, he has an insane thought that tells him he can take a drink. And he is unable to match that insane thought, I can take a drink, with what happened last time, the consequences. I renewed my resolve. I said I was never going to do this again. And so in no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. And that for me is that physical allergy. That in many times is how that looks. Well, I've already messed this thing up. I might as well, go hard or go home, So the allergy kicks off for him. And then what we see is the morning after. And again, looking at that cycle, that remorse and regret. He says the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. Have we had those mornings, right? Those mornings with that remorse, that horror, that hopelessness. He says that courage to do battle was not there. For me, what I believe he's referring to is that depression, that I don't want to get out of bed depression, that inability to even look at the idea of facing another day. My brain raced uncontrollably, so those thoughts going quickly. And there was a terrible sense of impending calamity, that feeling that something really bad is going to happen right now. That to me sounds like anxiety. Those racing thoughts, that feeling that something bad's going to happen. He's having terrible anxiety. I hardly dared cross the street lest I collapse and be lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with 12 glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. That feeling where, your nerves are just, you can feel it. For me, it sometimes feels like somebody's stabbing my shoulder blades, that feeling of your nerves just going. And he needs 12 glasses of ale to settle that. Yeah. A morning paper had told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog, that depressive fog, settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. What I want to point out is, page 3, I had arrived. I got this thing. I'm living life. I'm kicking butt. I'm taking names. Page 4, the stock market crashes, right? And his life is where he gets his worth, where he gets his esteem, where his financial security lies. It blows apart. And he reads the stories of men who are jumping to death to kill themselves as a result of going through the exact same loss. And he's like, oh, absolutely not. I'm going back to the bar. And then what we're seeing, page 6, page 6. Should I kill myself? No, not now. We're seeing that continuation. We're seeing that desperation. We're seeing that hopelessness. And we're going to see him really grow in terms of his suicidal ideation. One of the things I always want to point out is if I can relate to Bill on page 2. Now, Bill on page 2 is where we see the allergy, and he's showing up to his final exam drunk, and his wife's like, Bill, like, I don't know if that's a good idea. If I can relate to Bill on page 2 and I have alcoholism, then inevitably I will get to page 8. And page 8's pretty bad. And we're only on page 6. And there's not a lot of hope in page 6, right? So it says the mind and body are marvelous mechanisms. For mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. And one of the things that I want to point out about the 2 more years is, again, that's going to be from like 33 to just the start of 35. So when he spoke previously about the 5 years, these 2 years are encompassed in the 5 years. And I just want to point that out because for me, when I got here, I got here a little young. Don't worry, I burnt my life to the ground. And I would read that and I would think, man, he was drinking a long time, and he was drinking a substantial amount of time, but I was adding up those years and I thought it was more and more than it really was. So sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, the shame that sort of thing would carry. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. At this point, Bill Wilson is actively suicidal. He actively wants to end his life by jumping out of a window or overdosing on medication that he has in his medicine cabinet. But he doesn't have the courage or the internal strength to go through with it, but he now wants to die. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife sought escape. Maybe I didn't travel as much, but did I try those various geographics? Did I try going to different places to try to get a handle on this thing, to try to get a hold of my alcoholism? And then he says, then came the night where the physical and mental torture was so hellish. I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor lest I suddenly leap. And what he's talking about is now he's at that place of suicidal ideation where he feels like he can't even keep himself safe. He feels like he's just going to jump out the window. And when it says sash and all, for a long time, I thought sash, like a kind of a fancy dressing gown, or, maybe that was a 1930s sort of thing for it. I don't know. I didn't think that too much into it. But what he's talking about is a window sash, which would be the whole window trim. So he's saying, I'm going to jump out the window and I'm going to take the whole window with me. That is how he's feeling, where he's he can't even hold on to keep him safe. And so he's trying to drag the mattress down the stairs in an attempt to keep himself safe so he doesn't jump out of the window. That's what's going on for Bill. That's the desperation he's feeling. That's the hopelessness. And it says a doctor came with heavy sedative. Now, I'm just going to throw out, most of us intuitively knows what happens next. I'm not going to read it, just say. We'll get to it. Most of us know what happens next. I just want to suppose that a non-alcoholic does not know what happens next. A non-alcoholic, this is a mystery. Oh, what's going to happen? Is he going going to take his sedative medication as prescribed? Will he, what will he do? We know. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. Yes. Yes. You know any medication that said do not take with alcohol or may cause drowsiness? I'm not saying you guys did. I'm just saying that I might have had a time or two those alcoholic enhancers. And then there were sometimes I would also, again, just me, no, none of all of you lovely people, but I would also substitute with stimulants to, sober it up and get some control and then, find that magic concoction. Again, I'm not saying you lovely people would. I'm just saying I did. That was me. So it says, this combination soon landed me on the rocks. He's in trouble. People feared for my sanity. So did I. I just, that line to me speaks, people like worried. You know what it's like when you have people worried about you and worried about you and worried about you. And then after a while, it's like that fear starts, at least for me, that fear starts to creep in. And I'm like, I'm worried about me. And I don't really think very well of me or very highly of me, but I'm starting to get scared by what's going on. Now, I'm not going to tell them and I'm not going to admit that, but I'm starting to see things in the way that they're starting to see things. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. My brother-in-law, and this doesn't matter, but it's his sister's husband, is a physician. And again, this is just going to help you win AA trivia. It's not super important, but I really like to pepper in this sort of information in case you ever need to win some AA trivia. I got you sorted. The physician was Dr. Leonard V. Strong, and he actually played kind of an important role in the writing of the big book. When Bill Wilson got spoilers, he's going to get sober. Don't mean to spoil the end. But when he gets sober and he starts this idea of writing the book, Leonard Strong actually introduced him to the Rockefellers, who ended up helping with the process. So it's kind of an interesting connection. And allegedly, Bill, when Bill was really stressed out, he would kind of go and vent to Leonard about what was going on. So if you're like, oh, my ulceritis, it's stress, Bill. So just kind of a fun fact about their relationship, which again is not actually important to the story. So my brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. This is important to the story. This is the summer of 1933, and this is the Towns Hospital in New York City. And if you've been with us here a little while, you're like, hey, wait a minute, that sounds a little familiar. And we're going to see who he meets. So under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. And kind of when I first got sober, I don't think they do this nowadays, but when I first got sober, rehabs were really big into like volleyball as an activity. And I would jokingly, and I do this jokingly, make the joke that belladonna and hydrotherapy, that's like 1930s volleyball and paint and rocks. And I don't even think rehabs do either of those anymore. But what belladonna treatment actually was, because I, again, am a giant nerd, so I looked into it. Belladonna treatment was actually, if you've ever heard of the poison, deadly nightshade. So that's like some Snow White apple dipping poison, like kill you dead poison, deadly nightshade. And what they would do is they would give you that deadly nightshade at low doses to sort of create those hallucinations, to try to reframe, rewire the brain. So that's what that was. That's the sort of treatment that he was undergoing. And then it says hydrotherapy. And so again, I looked into what is hydrotherapy. Hydrotherapy was the treatment of warm baths and warm showers to help calm the nerves. So those were the treatments he was undergoing. And so just to kind of paint that picture of what was kind of going on at the time. And we're going to see that low doses of deadly nightshade to produce hallucinations and warm baths and showers are not a solution for alcoholism, because he's not going to stay sober. I'm just spoiling the story all over the place, you guys. I mean, he will eventually. We're going to see how, but like from this point. And so it says, best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill bodily and mentally. So you can write in your book and make a little note that what we're talking about there is the physical allergy and the mental obsession. And the doctor is Dr. Silkworth. So again, if we remember from the review that we've done so far, or for the work that we've done so far, this will be a bit of review. That what we're talking about here is he's starting to lay down the description of what our problem is, the description of what alcoholism is. And so Bill's getting that sort of front row seat in this doctor explaining it and diagnosing it. He learns, it says, it relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. So what it's saying is that when it comes to that first drink as an alcoholic, I do not have that willpower. You say, no, that's it. I'm not going to drink again. I don't have any willpower that will allow me to stay sober. And he's learning that. And what he's learning is the cycle. He's learning you're going to swear off, and then you're going to get thrown into this restless, irritable discontent, and you have this crazy thought that tells you you can drink again. And you're going to drink again. And Bill's like, yes, okay, I'm learning this. And he says, and it says, though it often remains strong in other respects. And I've worked with people who kind of hear that lack of willpower, and they're like, hey, hold on, I have willpower. And I'm with you. There are many areas in my life where I had willpower. You know, the willpower it takes to get up in the morning after a really, really, really bad night of drinking, that hangover, let's be real, that takes willpower to show up and get to work feeling as awful as we did. I used to be, this is a long time ago. I'm really excited for the half off candies that are going to be happening tomorrow. You know what I mean? I used to be really athletic. And that took willpower to go to the gym, to work out, to do those things. I have willpower, and I have the capacity for willpower in many areas of my life. And we're going to see how I can apply willpower to the 12 steps. And that will do quite well for me. And that will really help me. But when it comes to the first drink, no amount of willpower is going to last for any length of time. And he's going to learn that. And that's what he's learning right now. So he says, so my incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. And I don't know about you guys, but when I finally learned that's what that was, there was a sense of relief. You know, when you heard about the allergy for the first time, oh, that makes sense. And hearing about the mental obsession, oh, that makes sense. There was that sense of relief. That is what is wrong with me. So he says, understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. I got this thing, you guys, faring forth in high hope for 3 or 4 months. So one of the things I also want to point out, when he goes to the town's hospital, we look at it just like a rehab or a treatment center. That is him swearing off. He's saying, I am never going to drink again. And he means it. I'm never going to drink again. He is sworn off. And so for 3 or 4 months, he gets out of treatment. He learns what's wrong with him. 3 or 4 months, he's sober. And it says, for 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. And I will explain what that means. Because I was worried. I'll be honest with you guys. Sometimes when I work with sponsees and they struggle with the idea or conception of a loving God, what I do regularly remind them of, and this is a bit of an aside, but I think it's delightful. I don't know if y'all have noticed that ducks' feet are orange. Delightful, just delightful. And all I'm saying is that it's got to be a loving God, right? Duck's feet, orange. Only a loving God would do that. And I was worried that the expression, the goose hung high, had some dark implications, and that maybe the goose was no longer with us, and that my delicate sensibilities, I was a little worried about that, so I looked into it. And so the expression "the goose hung high," what that means, it originated from a time when, and I know this is kind of a weird thing to explain, but if I was excited to learn it because it's one of those things we read and kind of skip. But what it meant is when there were no evil spirits about. Perfect day to be talking about this. When there were no evil spirits about, the geese would be flying high in the sky. So if the geese are flying high in the sky, there's no evil spirits. All is well, all is good. Heck yeah, everything's doing as it should, right? But if there are evil spirits, the ducks are going to be, or the geese, sorry, are going to be flying low. So that's, I don't have a good rhyme for that. Geese are low. Work the steps with your sponsor is my rhyme for that. I'm a poet. So for 3 or 4 months, no evil spirits, everything's good. I'm good. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Things are good, right? And it's important to remember, so how often I will confuse the gifts of recovery with recovery itself. How often I confuse getting my job, getting the family back, getting into a relationship, getting all those things. The gifts of recovery are not recovery. So he's made a little money, but he's like, look, I'm doing it. He's like, surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. And thus begins a theme that we're going to see throughout this book time and time and time again. Self-knowledge does not keep me sober. Me knowing that I'm an alcoholic, me conceding to my innermost self will not keep me sober. What keeps me sober is a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. That's the only thing that will keep me sober. I do need to have that self-knowledge so that I'm able to concede, so I'm able to do those steps. But that self-knowledge by himself, it's not going to work. So surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. I got it, self-knowledge. But it was not. For the frightful came when I drank once more. Burp, burp, right? And so in between the goose hanging high, flying high, goose as well, and the day came when he drank once more. What kicked in for him was the mental obsession. So the mental obsession kicked in and he took that first drink and off he went. And that's the thing. I mean, I can explain the cycle and I can explain it, but Dr. Silkworth, he's the guy, and he's explaining it to Bill Wilson, front row seat, best guy to explain it, maybe, I don't know. And Bill Wilson knows the cycle. And when he has that insane thought, he can't peg it that it's an insane thought. He can't say that thought is insane. He cannot differentiate the true from the false, and he drinks again. So the curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. So it's a very sharp, steep decline. After a time, I returned to the hospital. So this is the summer of 1934. And so this is about a year later. So in between his hospitalization. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within the year. And so what he's saying is, if you've ever heard of Korsakoff syndrome, wet brain, it's also known as, I believe, Whitnicki's encephalopathy. And that's where you drink yourself into a state of brain damage from the brain being as dehydrated and damaged as it is. And delirium tremens are the physical, and I'm just in case anyone doesn't know, and some of you are like, yes, I know, I have experienced them, but it's the physical response to withdrawing from alcohol. And the physical response from withdrawing from alcohol can actually be quite fatal, because one can have a seizure and die. And so that's what's being said. And she would soon, so my weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. So one of the things I just want to point out about this is they did not tell Bill Wilson this. Dr. Silkworth wasn't like, here's the prognosis, Bill. Lois wasn't like, hey, Bill, here's what Dr. Silkworth said. Bill Wilson is in the hospital room, and outside of the room, he's overhearing Dr. Silkworth telling Lois, like, Lois, listen, he's probably going to be dead within the year. I mean, and if not, he's going to be so permanently brain injured. I mean, you're going to have to take care of him. So what I'm going to need you to do is to make arrangements, either, get his financial affairs in order, or plan to put him in a long-term asylum where he can spend the rest of his days, because that is the reality. Now, they didn't tell Bill Wilson this because Bill was an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. What Dr. Silkworth described, like he's like, there's nothing I can do for this man. There is nothing that I can do for this man, so I'm not going to tell him this news, and I don't bum him out is a little bit light for the situation. Like, I don't want to depress this guy. It'll probably only make it worse. So Bill Wilson is overhearing the fatality of his disease. So he's saying they did not need to tell me. They didn't tell him. He overhears. And he says, I knew and almost welcomed the idea. He's at that place in his life where he knows it's bad. He knows he's in trouble. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself, of my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Have I had those moments where I felt cornered, where I felt backed into a corner? And it says, now I was to plunge into the dark, joining the endless procession of sots who had gone on before, right? And came from a line of alcoholics. And he says, I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. He goes on to say, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And if there was ever a point in this book where I would say that is Bill Wilson's step one, I would say it right there. Right there for me is Bill Wilson's first step. And I'm gonna point out he's not gonna stay sober. And this might be a little controversial, but I can't stay sober on a step one, because a step one is the concession to my innermost self that I will drink again. I'm up against something that is more powerful than me. I'm up against this insane thought which will compel me to take another drink, no matter how much I want to, no matter how much I need to. I will drink again. But this is Bill Wilson's step one. He's got no more fight in him. He's got nothing left in him. And if at this moment there was a solution for him to surrender to, I really believe he would have surrendered to it. But we're going to see that in this moment, all he has is the information of what his problem is. And I love that it really talks about quicksand stretching around him in all directions. And I remember, I'm just kind of sharing this with you because maybe you relate. I remember being where some of the places my alcoholism took me was homelessness. And being homeless doesn't make me an alcoholic. It just means, and I would joke about this, and I'm joking about this with me and for me, not anyone else's situation. But I was a little residentially challenged. That doesn't necessarily make me an alcoholic. Again, what makes me an alcoholic is the lack of control when I drink and my inability to stop and stay stopped when I want to. That is what makes me an alcoholic, right? And that's it. But those were some of the consequences of drinking. And I remember I had a friend that took me, and she took me to Wendy's because it had the old sunroof. I don't know, you know what I mean with the Wendy's. And she asked me, Paige, what is your life like right now? And there was so much I could not put words to, but I remember describing it like I was in the middle of the ocean and I was alone, and it was like I was slowly drowning. That is what my life felt like. And when I was able to read that that's what Bill Wilson was like, it was another one of those gifts of identification. You know, I'm able to see, hey, I'm like you, Bill. I feel that way. And again, the more that I kind of am able to relate myself to Bill's story, the more I'm able to see that I'm not any different than this 1930s stock speculator. So it says, trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. And so that's the thing. Self-knowledge won't keep me sober, and fear won't keep me sober. It won't. You know, and I've worked with people who, you know, I do AA, I do NA, I'm in CA as well. And I've worked with people who, you know, come and they tell me, Paige, I was Narcaned 8 times. And I don't ever want to go through that. The next time I go out, I'm going to die. And they go out, you know, and some of them do. But again, that's the reality, is knowing that if I were to relapse, I'm likely to die does not have any power to keep me sober. And I'm just trying to emphasize that powerlessness. So fear sober me for a bit. It'll create that window of willingness, that little openness. And it says, then came that insidious insanity. And that insidious insanity is the mental obsession, that insane thought that he had of that first drink. And on Armistice Day is November 11th, 1934, I was off again. And so again, I don't know if this is a helpful story, but this is the story of what this relapse looked like for Bill. So from my understanding, Bill Wilson, he goes out and he's going to go golfing because he had not given up that golf fever. He's going to go golfing, and he was on a bus to go to the golf course. And I'd imagine it's a bit more of a remote sort of golf course. And I don't know exactly the golf course or exactly the bus. I am a big nerd, but I'm not that big a nerd. And the bus broke down, and you know, it's the 1930s, so he doesn't have like a cell phone to like scroll and ignore the world. So he's forced to have some sort of social interaction, and he makes a friend. And so they're chit-chatting away and, you know, talking, and the bus breaks down, and they go into a cafe, you know, to wait, get something to eat while the bus gets repaired, and they're eating and talking, and this is how I'm imagining it, is the very classic alcoholic overshare. I just met you. Here's my life story. And so in that, he's sharing, you know, I swore off drinking, you know, and then the Apple Jacks went around, and I got drunk again, and I was in the town's hospital, you know, this great guy, Dr. Silkworth, Silky, you'd like him. Anywho, and then I relapsed, and then I learned that if I were to ever drink again, I would die. I would end up in an asylum, and he's explaining the cycle, like he's explaining it from his own life, and the guy's like, whoa, that's crazy, and a waiter comes by, and the waiter is like, would you like something to drink? And Bill says, yeah, I'll take 2. And as the story goes, the guy's like, are you insane? And Bill Wilson is like, yeah. And he takes the drink, and that kicks off this relapse, right? And it says, everyone became resigned to this certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. And that's one of those in this book, how many times we see the hopelessness and the hope, from hopelessness to hope. So from that darkness comes that dawn. In reality, that was to be the beginning of my last debauch. The debauch being, you know, last spree, last bender, right? I was soon to be catapulted. And I want to point out the velocity through which he is going to be there, catapulted. So quickly catapulted into what I like to call the 4th dimension of existence. And whenever I see the 4th dimension of existence, I can make a little note that what that means is a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience. I was soon to know a spiritual experience. And one of the things I do with sponsees, I like to avoid the appendix, the spiritual appendices. Like I just like to avoid that. We'll read it together and we'll go through it. But the reason I like to avoid it is because I find it more fun to find all the descriptions of what a spiritual experience looks like without it. And to see all these different ways of what a spiritual experience is and what a spiritual experience looks like before reading that. It's a weird, nerdy, rebellious streak that I have. Like, woo! And so this is what a description of a spiritual experience is. It says, I was to know. It's a deep inner knowing. We'll talk about that when we get there. It's this deep inner knowing. Know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life. Oh, way of life? You mean I gotta keep doing this thing? Yes. I'm letting you know now, so it's not a surprise later on. A way of life, but this way of life that I've never done, that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And we're gonna end a little bit early. But before we end, one of the things that was really helpful for me was there's an author, and he wrote, I think it was C.S. Lewis. He wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And he of all people had this beautiful description of what the fourth dimension of existence looks like. And I'm gonna do a very eloquent diagram on my notebook to explain it to you. Because when we look at the different sort of dimensions of existence, we have 2D. So me drawing I'm going to draw a little stick figure, right? This is a little 2D diagram, a little stick figure, right? And so I'm operating in the realm of the third dimension. I'm in 3D, stick figure in 2D. Now imagine I am going to draw a road. Look at that. What a beautiful road. I'm not giving a lot of nods of validation on my artistic abilities. I'm kidding. So that is a road. Now to all of us in the third dimension, we're like, wow, that's a road. It's the prettiest. You don't know. You can be like, it's a sufficient road. I don't need my tires pumped that much. But imagine living in the second dimension, right? 2D. The little stick figure, he's like, girl, what are you talking about? That's a triangle. That's a triangle. That's no road, right? And maybe that doesn't make sense to you, but it's one of those things that I've awakened to when I'm able to see God's presence in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or the rooms of 12-step, and I'm able to see God's presence in the light of a sponsee's eyes coming on, and I'm able to see the presence of God, and somebody is just like, no, that's a tree, or no, that's just a 40-minute meeting. Like, what are you talking about? We're able to see the world with just a new lens. And that's what we're after, and that's what we're talking about. And page 8 is, and the paragraph we left off on is it's just the natural stopping point where I like to leave off, because the next time we pick up, we're going to get into the solution, and we're going to see the process of him being catapulted into that fourth dimension of existence. And I love that before we talks about that, how dark it is before the dawn, but then we get that hope, because it is always that hopeless to hope. So I'll stop the recording, and I want to thank you guys for being here with me.